there. I got you. I got you, baby. Come on. I got you. I got you, baby. Hey, she's still alive.
This was the voice of Officer Randy Orozco, the first responder who arrived at a rat-infested trailer home in rural New Mexico. This stranger fought harder to save Jacqueline Bynum than her parents ever did. Jacqueline had just celebrated her 5th birthday, except celebrated is a joke in this context. Her trailer home was a garbage heap. Her brother and the family dogs were barely conscious. Their parents were still breathing, but not really alive either. Jacqueline celebrated her birthday dying, trapped under the very woman who was supposed to protect her. What followed was one of the most confusing, painful, and deeply tragic investigations authorities in Grant County had ever witnessed. Nothing made sense until they dug deeper, until they saw what Jacqueline's brother had gone through, until they uncovered what really killed her. This is the heartbreaking story of Jacqueline Bynum. The sun had barely risen on March 10th, 2024, when Thaddeus Hawkins opened his eyes to the sound of someone screaming. He was sleeping inside his van, parked just a few feet from the tiny trailer where his friends, 34-year-old Music Adaim and her boyfriend, Matthew Bynum, lived with their 2 children. Thaddeus was no stranger to their chaos. He would hear strange noises from their home every day, and the couple was always fighting. But this time was different. The sound in Music's voice cut through everything. So he ran to the trailer and shoved the door open. Before he even reached Jacqueline, the smell told him something was very wrong. It was the kind of rancid smell that made you choke. Trash lined the walls and filled the house, so much so that the front door didn't open all the way. A tub filled with old ashes just sat outside. Inside, there were no distinct rooms, just one small open space covered in clutter, filth, and silence. 2 dogs looked at Thaddeus, hungry and terrified. Music and Matthew were barely moving, sprawled on a mattress. On one chair was a little boy looking dazed, and there was someone else, a little girl lying under her parents. Thaddeus didn't even see her at first. That's how covered she was. He moved Matthew off of her, and then Music, and then that's when he realized the girl, Jacqueline, wasn't breathing. Her skin was pale and her body was limp. In fact, her skin was beginning to turn blue. The parents barely reacted to Thaddeus entering their home, so he nudged Music and told her to get up. Her response, "Everything's fine. We don't need help." Luckily, Thaddeus knew better.
Grant County 911, what is the address of the emergency?
97 Quail Run. I'm staying with some friends right now, and they are completely, you have a little girl who's not responsive at all. To the adult, the parents are somewhat responsive, but not, they're in and out of her. And then they have a 7-year-old boy.
Deputies rushed to the scene. One of them was Officer Orozco. He had no idea what he was walking into, except for what Thaddeus had described.
There's people in the room right here that aren't responding.
What's going on?
Music and Matthew were unable to sit up, and they slurred their words. They tried to explain they were just tired, but couldn't explain why their daughter was lying underneath them, pale and silent. Listen to the officer's voice when he realizes where little Jacqueline was.
You guys need to move.
Yes.
Move. You guys need to get up now.
Yeah.
Get up.
We're getting up. We're getting up.
Get up.
We're getting up. I'm getting up.
Let's go. Hurry up. Get up.
You guys, the contrast is jarring. How desperate Officer Orozco gets versus how Jacqueline's parents remain completely unbothered.
Get up now. Get out. Get out. I don't care. Stand up.
I'm going.
Eventually, he got to Jacqueline. He performed CPR right there at the scene. He gave her everything he had, but nothing changed. She didn't wake up. Jacqueline was gone. And her parents were still unresponsive to the officer's cries or to his anger.
What is it?
No, it's not. No, we just fell asleep really hard. We're really sick.
While the first responders were struggling to make sense of this tragedy, Matthew and Melody kept complaining about their stiffness. They were unable or unwilling to grasp what had just happened. But the horror of this case was just beginning to unravel. The investigation would reveal an even more painful story, one that left a whole police department in tears. The first heartbreaking moment of the investigation happened when officers checked Jacqueline's medical records. She had just celebrated her 5th birthday the night before. There were no balloons still taped to the walls, no leftover presents, no wrapping paper or toys scattered across the trailer floor, just trash and darkness. When questioned at the hospital, her mother, Music Adam, offered one detail. They'd bought a chocolate cake from Albertsons for Jacqueline's birthday.
All that we had was the chocolate cake that we bought at Albertsons just before bed. We ate one more slice of chocolate cake.
Music was telling the officer this as a way to say that she was confused as to why she was so catatonic earlier. She didn't understand why she and Matthew would collapse like this. But the fact that she collapsed was not the problem. It's that she collapsed on her daughter. Investigators would later learn that at the time of discovery, Jacqueline's small body had been physically pinned between her mother and her father. Part of her crushed under Music, the other under Matthew. It was a position no one had noticed right away, not even Thaddeus, who had walked in and initially only spotted the boy.
And I looked and they're on top of her. I didn't even see him. Like half of his left body was on her left side, half of her right body was on her other side.
The investigators also learned that the couple hadn't even moved when he came in. They denied taking fentanyl, which could have made them catatonic like this, but a toxicology report had to be done before officers could believe these two. To give you some context, this wasn't a typical scene. It was a disaster that even confused seasoned officers. Now we have to pause for a minute and realize how confusing the investigation was at this point. You have 2 lethargic parents, one 7-year-old boy in a terrible state, a house of horrors, and a little girl gone. Even Thaddeus wasn't off the hook yet, not until the cops got the gist of what had happened.
Why am I being arrested?
You're not being arrested, you're being detained. Turn
Why?
around. Because you're up here and there's a kid, that's why.
Yeah, that's what tells you the stakes were really high. And it wasn't just the tragedy of losing Jacqueline. Her big brother was in a bad state, and every second was crucial. So while he was taken into an ambulance, one of the officers spoke to him, trying to get as many details about this case before he was taken to the hospital. Listen to this.
How's he doing?
He's good.
He is?
Said he hasn't eaten since Friday. So.
Yeah, this little kid who was practically starving was making more sense than his parents. Before we move on, here's what makes this statement even more important. There was a crucial clue here. He hadn't eaten since Friday. His sister's birthday was Saturday. So when Music ranted on and on about that chocolate cake, the officer knew she was lying. Unless she had cake, but her kids didn't. The boy also told responders something even more haunting, that when he tried to get up that morning, his legs didn't work, just like his parents, and most likely, just like his sister. Something was very wrong, and no one, not Music, not Matthew, seemed to have any answers.
Like, we all were all frothy. I can't explain
The
it.
more the doctors let Music talk, the more she revealed about her habits.
Like, I've done a lot of drugs, and nothing has ever been like that.
Within half an hour, she told about 10 conflicting stories. First, she said she hadn't used drugs at all. Then, she said she had smoked meth the day before, but only around noon 30. Then, she said no, she would never take anything on her daughter's birthday. Then, she said everyone felt fine until they had the birthday cake. That's when the symptoms started. She rambled on about past head injuries and seizures. She mentioned numbness in her arms in the mornings, and she kept demanding a toxicology report. She even sounded like a worried mom for a second.
Hi. You have any questions for me?
My kids okay?
Your kid's okay right now.
Yeah, at this point, Music still did not know that her daughter had passed away. The officer held on to that piece of information because he wanted a slow, controlled investigation. But Music's question is haunting on many levels. It's not just that she didn't realize what had happened to Jacqueline. It's also that she thought her other kid, and the dogs too, would be okay. Who could ever be okay in that house? So far, one thing was clear to the investigators. That trailer home had never been okay for children and pets. As you guys know, toxicology reports can often explain what words can't. Officers had to figure out just what this family had in their systems, because even if the drugs had been laced with something more dangerous, the boy had shown the same signs. At the hospital, he was still in a very poor state.
Try to get it to pee, but you can this one.
Any findings so far?
Yeah, let me get you another pen.
No one believed the kids had access to anything illicit. In other words, the boy had not consumed meth with his parents. And in any case, as bad as it is, meth doesn't make you numb and catonic, so officers had to look elsewhere. Back inside the trailer, one detail kept bothering them: a metal bin in the bathtub filled with ashes. At first, it seemed like just another piece of the junk-filled disaster zone, but slowly they started to wonder, was it more? Thaddeus was brought in for questioning, and at first he told a familiar lie. Music and Matthew only ever used weed, no hard drugs. But that was just what the couple had told him. And when officers asked about the heat, he added the next heartbreaking twist to the case.
How did they heat the house? It was it's a propane heater on the wall, yeah. But last night, a few nights ago, the propane ran out, and they had taken it off to go get propane, but never got it to the propane bill.
Thaddeus confirmed these two didn't set fires inside the house, but mentioned something else, something just as sinister.
They go and I thought you saw the coals in the bathtub.
Yeah.
So that was where they went and they burned wood and brought it in once it was coals and no smoke left.
It clicked: carbon monoxide. As you probably know, carbon monoxide is a silent killer, and that trailer was a sealed death trap. It had no working heater, no airflow, just two kids, two adults, two scared dogs, and a smoldering bin of coals sealed inside overnight. It wouldn't take much to do irreparable harm. Before the officer wrapped up Thaddeus's interrogation, he revealed this.
Seeing her afterwards.
Like, I'm not lying. Like, it knocked me down. I cried for a good long while.
I saw you walking away from the ambulance crying.
Yeah.
I didn't know why.
Unlike her parents, the officers were devastated, and it showed. By the end of that day, Jacqueline's parents were taken to the police station. Detectives didn't tell Music and Matthew about their carbon monoxide theory, not yet. If they knew, they might start adjusting their story to deflect blame, and they wanted them raw. Instead, they only revealed this piece of information to Matthew.
Who died?
What's that?
Who died?
The little girl's gone. Okay.
Matthew cried, but he demanded a lawyer. He wouldn't tell Music what had happened either. She still thought Jacqueline was alive. They were sent off while the investigation progressed, but their home was sealed off. They would be homeless, but free. Officers hated it. Some cried again. This was anything but justice. But legally, they didn't have enough yet to hold them, because at that point, Jacqueline's toxicology report hadn't come back. They needed hard evidence. Carboxyhemoglobin levels, CO saturation in her blood, and they were waiting on that from the lab. Until then, all they had was a scene. A horrifying, yes, but explainable if you squinted hard enough. Before toxicology confirmed anything, however, investigators kept digging. That's why the police sealed the trailer home. A team went back to investigate all the causes that could have led to Jacqueline's death. One of the forensic officers noted something important.
Girl could have gotten sick. I mean, living like this, gets a little bit of a cold or something, and there you go.
In other words, carbon monoxide poisoning wasn't even necessary. Living in a rat-infested, bug-infested home filled with toxic waste and rot leads to immunity compromise. Any day, any of the two children could have lost their lives in that trailer for a dozen reasons. This is what makes this case so infuriating. Just how unaware Music and Matthew were. How they thought themselves capable of raising two children and caring for two dogs while high as a kite and living like that. Speaking of the dogs, they were taken in by animal control. Jacqueline's brother thankfully stayed at the hospital. He would be taken in by other relatives. For weeks, it felt like the case was losing momentum, but the detectives never stopped working. For many of them, this was by far the worst and most infuriating case they had ever handled. And when that family report came back, it was over. The number was 70%. That's how saturated Jacqueline's blood was with carbon monoxide. A non-smoker usually has 1 to 3%. Smokers might hit 7 or 8. There was no other explanation needed. That bin of coal had pumped poison into the air all night. The trailer was sealed. There was no oxygen, and her tiny body simply could not survive it. But here's what made it worse. Music knew about the risks. When she was called in for an interrogation the following day, she started ranting again.
But like, recently I've just done, and I've done a lot of drugs throughout my life though. My name is Music. My parents named me Music, you know? That's the life I grew up in.
By the way, if your parents were neglectful or perhaps even struggling with addiction, why would you do the same to your children? In the interrogation, Music admitted that in the past, the kids had thrown up when they kept the windows closed while running the heat.
My son was waking up, throwing up, and we discovered it's because we had all the windows shut with the propane heater on, so it wasn't ventilating properly.
She said that's why they started cracking them open at night, but this time they didn't. They were high, they were tired, and they forgot. Or worse, they didn't care. And you guys, here is another sad twist. This interrogation was happening 24 hours after Music and Matthew were sent home. 24 hours after Matthew learned about his daughter, and yet he still hadn't told his girlfriend about it. Yes, Music was still asking if her kids were okay. The officer talked about her son first.
So from what they're thinking, at that time, things could have changed. He looks like he has a touch of pneumonia.
Then he finally revealed what Matthew should have.
Zachy, she didn't survive. Fine.
Officer Orozco's interrogation report would state she appeared to attempt to be shocked and also cried, but no tears came out. She would stop and stare for brief moments of time, which could have been initial shock or theatrics. Officers like Randy Orozco, who have done their fair share of interrogations, can see through acts like these. He wouldn't have written that if he didn't suspect Music of lying. And it's one thing to lie about how many drugs you do. It's a whole other thing to lie about your feelings, about caring for your daughter's death. These are heavy facts that can make a difference between a few years in life and prison. Once the carbon monoxide evidence came in, prosecutors moved fast. Music Adam and Matthew Bynum were both charged with intentional abuse of a child, resulting in death and child abandonment. And not just because of the carbon monoxide. Investigators had uncovered months of neglect. No food, no working heat, no supervision, and a known pattern of meth use around the kids. Plus, a 7-year-old who literally told nurses he hadn't eaten in 48 hours. This is typical of neglect. Well, it's called abuse. In March 2025, Music and Matthew made headlines again.
Today marks 1 year since a girl was found dead in Silver City as the child abuse cases against her parents move forward. Jacqueline Bynum died 1 day after her 5th birthday.
Their trial has been set for early 2026. Until then, a few institutions have to answer a long list of questions.
CYFD has been under fire in this case, including from lawmakers, after reports show the state had been called multiple times before her death.
Yes, sadly you heard that right. There were multiple reports and multiple instances where officers visited the Bynum home. How on earth did they miss the squalor, the fear in the dog's eyes? If that's what we saw in those brief body cam moments, imagine what the CYFD officers saw. If the dogs looked terrified, imagine how Jacqueline and her brother did. Being a child protection officer, you would think that they would be even more sensitive to children suffering. And yet, no one removed them from that house. No one followed up to see if the family had heat or food or functioning parents. It's a question we're forced to ask over and over again in these cases. Why do child protective services exist if they never seem to protect the child? The agency has a name that implies safety and urgent intervention, but But if a child in that level of filth doesn't raise red flags, what does? The most haunting part of this case might not be Music or Matthew. It might be the silence of every adult who was paid, trained, and legally obligated to protect that child and still didn't. To make matters worse, this was not an isolated failure. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reports 4.3 million CA reports each year. Of those, only 600,000 are investigated. Over 1,990 children died in 2022 due to abuse and neglect, most under the age of 5. What's even worse, children previously reported to CPS were over 4 times more likely to die from maltreatment than children with no report history. Think about that. These aren't cases where no one saw it coming. These are children who are already on the radar. In Jacqueline's case, CYFD now says that they are reviewing policies. But how many dead 5-year-olds does it take before a policy gets changed? Because it wasn't just the carbon monoxide, it wasn't just the meth or the ash bin or the rot. It was all of the above, plus an ignorant system. The prosecutors have done their part. They've charged Music and Matthew with the worst they could charge them with. Their trial is set for early 2026, and no one expects them to walk away without punishment. Losing their children should be punishment enough until then. But until Jacqueline's brother and the rest of his family get their closure, the wheels keep turning. That's why the CYFD is under fire. Because if nothing changes, there will be another Jacqueline. Maybe she'll be 3, maybe 7, maybe a newborn. If the system doesn't change, someone else will fall through the cracks. Someone else will be floppy and starving and begging for help nobody gives. So today we told Jacqueline's story, not just to expose her parents, but to hold the system accountable. Because the next time a little girl dies in filth with a dog licking her face, no, they did, and they failed. So here's the question we leave you with. What does it actually take for a child to be saved in America? How broken does a home have to be before someone, anyone, intervenes? And most importantly, what can we do to stop waiting for justice until after the child is dead? If this case shattered you like it shattered us, talk about it, share it, and like and subscribe to this channel as we're not done exposing the hard truth. Watch our next video too. It'll make your skin crawl. Stay safe, you guys, and see you soon.